Hello, everybody. It's Graham Cove with another My Music. In a minute, we're going to be learning some vocabulary, so I hope you're all ready for that this afternoon. If you're not, make yourself a cup of tea, get yourself into the right headspace, and in a minute, we'll come back and talk to Neil, and we'll learn a word or two. But first, watch a really shockingly loud video, which will probably break the silence. Thank you to Analog Trash for sponsoring this show and for providing us with that moment of entertainment there as well. Do check out analogtrash.com. Keep on, don't stop. You see, that was the message throughout that video, and that was kind of what we were talking about just before we came on, because that's what life is like, isn't it, for most of us these days? We just keep going. We don't stop.
Yeah, and I think it actually I was at a radio interview last night with a great artist from Spain called Nacho Vegas, and he was telling the Portuguese Radio 3 interviewer Nuno Calado, the radio DJ. They were talking about that, and Nacho said something along the lines of, the pandemic was a moment for us to sort of ponder when we were all stuck at home. We got to sort of ponder time and how we use time. And, the hopeful sort of feeling at the time was that, yeah, we might learn something from this and do things a little bit better after. And it seems like we've actually, in a way, gone the other way.
Yeah.
And so we've come out of the pandemic in a world that is even more sped up because we have new habits. We're online even more than we were before. And we're dealing with several time zones at once. And everyone sort of expects us to be available, whether they're calling from California or Australia or whatever. And it's like, actually, we've gone back to a sort of in loco physical existence where we're in our own town doing our thing, but everybody else online is still also expecting us to keep up. And I think it's sped up in a really unhealthy way, to be honest. And I think it's really key. As we were saying before, I think it's key to find those moments to sort of tune out and just live the moment.
And you were teaching me a word. Do you want to teach everybody that word?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. There's a word in Alentejo, which is the southern region of Portugal. The plains and the farmland, lots of grapes, wine, and they have a word called vagar, V-A-G-A-R.
I love it. It's just the way you say, even the sound of it sounds like the word. It's almost onomatopoeic, isn't it?
It's sort of like a multiple level thing too, because vagar could mean the motion of the waves, or it could mean having time to do something, or it could mean having time to do nothing. So the multiple levels of it. It's a beautiful word, and it's we're very fortunate to have ToZé and Lusitanian Ghosts playing the viola Campaniça from the Alentejo. So he taught us that word.
Yeah, that is an absolutely beautiful word, and I think we all need a little bit more of it. In terms of what you were saying about the pandemic and time standing still and us, hoping we'd learn from that, I feel that so much. I really do feel that so much. I think the big disappointment that some of us will think about looking back on the whole pandemic period, maybe not everybody, but I certainly will to some extent, will be that I felt in those moments where we didn't know what was coming, that part of me had to keep busy, because that's the kind of person that I am.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I wish in a way, I mean, starting this was a good thing. And I've enjoyed continuing with this. But I think in a way, perhaps, some of us left the opportunity there to actually just do nothing.
Yeah, but
It's hard, isn't it?
I think there's a very direct emotional connection between doing nothing and doing what really pleases us.
Mm.
And if we took up things during the pandemic that were emotionally beneficial, then by all means, I think we should try and continue those activities and persevere even as life comes back at us. Full speed train.
I think the reason we've sped up coming back in is because I think we feel that we've lost time. We may be trying to make up for lost time, but that's ridiculous, isn't it? Because once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, I think there might be some sort of escapist behavior on that level, but I don't think, as a rule, I don't think, at least that's not my perception of it. I don't think it's a lost time situation. I think it's more of like just multiple levels of behaviors and day-to-day habits that are now sort of layered on top instead of just having one life, we just have these multiple levels of existence, whether physical or virtual or whatever, and that's not very healthy.
No. Well, let's talk about The Long Train.
All right.
Your song, because
yeah,
I'll tell you what, it fits in nicely to the discussion, because listening to that, I felt like time had just gone back. It really feels like, not only in the actual writing, but the production and everything, it just feels like a time in the past. Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy to hear you say that. I mean, we went out of our way in a very sort of purposeful mission to record and mix on analog, and come out of the studio with stereo and mono mixes, all analog. So I think Analog Trash would also appreciate that.
Yeah.
But we went to a studio, I think one of the few studios where you can still do that these days at a somewhat affordable cost. But it was really what do you call those filmmakers that sort of set up some rules as to how they go about shooting? And we set up those rules about how we go about recording. And so it was about doing it the old-fashioned way and doing things live off the floor, on tape, mixing down to tape, not spending a lot of time questioning performances and stuff. I think I tried like 4 different vocal mics just because I could, and it was like we ended up using a Neumann and an old RCA for the double.
Wow.
And it was, but it was very. I mean, some of the reference points for what we did in the studio at Clouds Hill were like Exile on Main Street by the Stones. So it was meant to sound that way, and I'm happy.
It does sound.
From what you're saying, I'm happy the mission was accomplished.
Yeah, no, it really does sound that way. You would never think that this is a recording in 2022, 2023. You'd never think that.
Yeah, it was January 23, so it's from this year. It's from this year.
You would genuinely think, you could place this in the middle of the early 70s or something like that, and it would sound absolutely at home.
That's very cool. Thank you.
It is, and it's incredibly cool. And I just think it's got a lovely, because of that, the whole sound of it has got a lovely warmth to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the other sort of peculiar bit is that we didn't use any guitars, so it's all of Lusitanian Ghosts is a sort of chordophone project using these medieval folk instruments from Portugal. They're sort of these half-size guitars with different sets of strings and different tunings. On the first record, we still used the old 6-string electric and acoustic, but we dropped that from the second album, and this third one also there's no guitars at all. So it's just these violas from Portugal, the viola Amarantina, the Campaniça, which ToZé plays from the Alentejo. Micke Ghost from Sweden plays the Amarantina. I think he's the first Swedish man to learn the viola Amarantina from the north of Portugal.
Wow.
We also have Abel Beja from Primitive Reason playing the viola terceira, which is from the Azores. So from, somewhere between Portugal and America. And Abe was actually born in New York City. So he's himself sort of, halfway between Portugal and the US. And it's, so it's sort of a peculiar mission because we have the instruments from Portugal, but we want to make an old school record on analog tape, and it's sung in English by Micke and I, and it's so it's sort of I don't really know how to describe it.
Now, and no disrespect to anybody out there that's making music documentaries at the moment, because there's hundreds of them. That are appearing here, there, and everywhere, yeah. and whilst it's great that Ed Sheeran and the like are making their documentaries and putting them on all of the big streaming platforms. There's a documentary I'd love to see. I'd love to see you guys actually having to learn these instruments, and what was that process like? Do you have to find someone to teach you to play it? Do you have to sort of find an old master, or do you?
Yeah, there's two ways to go about that. I mean, well, probably more than two ways. But when we were doing the first album, we invited a young filmmaker to do a documentary. It never really got a wide release or anything, but there is sort of a making of and a full feature documentary, like an hour-long film on the first record. And we talked to some ethnomusicologists about the instruments, and we sort of documented that. So I can send you a link for that. But to the second question, when I bought our first viola Amarantina and I took it to Stockholm, gave it to Micke Ghost, Mikael Lundin, he went on YouTube and found some old players of the Amarantina, and so he sort of and he reached out. He wrote them and he said, "Look, I've been gifted this instrument by a friend of mine, and I want to learn how to play it. How many different tunings are there? It's a 10-string instrument. Like there's the moda velha, which is one particular tuning, which is the old way, and then there's a slightly more modern way, which is still over 100 years old." And so I think he learned with that second tuning from someone that he reached out to on YouTube. But that's one way to go about it, is to talk to the old players and keep the original tuning of the instrument and try to learn with that tuning. And it's like learning a new language. It's like learning to play an instrument where the notes are not where you expect them to be on a guitar. Another way to do it is to use the instrument, but retune it to a regular guitar. And we also had some of the members in our collective, which are not on the new record, but on the previous record, Gajo, who also played the viola Campaniça. Gajo played the viola Campaniça, but tuned like a guitar.
Right.
And I think Abe from Primitive does that as well with the terceira. So that's another way to do it. You're still using the old instrument, which sounds a different way, but you're tuning it to a way that is already part of your language. And I don't think there's a right or wrong to that. I think a lot of sort of purists in the folk circles go, you cannot, you can't change the tuning. You're messing with whatever. I'm like, I don't really believe that. I think
it's an instrument at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's meant to be experimental to a degree, and if it helps you along, but I mean, even a guitar can be tuned a number of different ways. I mean,
right.
there's open E, there's open G, there's many different ways to tune it. So I'm all for it, and I think that's kind of what it is about as well. Is breaking down these sort of preconceived ideas of what you can or cannot do with certain instruments.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise we would never have had any evolution in music, would we?
Right,
exactly. We wouldn't have had anyone ever stick a guitar, stick an amp on a guitar, or then stick a distortion pedal on a guitar, and
or reverb on vocals or whatever it might be. But I think that's part of the process.
Yeah.
And I think if another sort of mission that we're on, to an extent, is to sort of get some international recognition for the instruments themselves, because a lot of people know the ukulele as a Hawaiian instrument, but actually the ukulele is a descendant from the cavaquinho, which is another Portuguese chordophone that made its way around the world in the ships back in the terrible age of the discoveries, in quotes, where we were one of the major proponents of the slave trade, and not a very healthy colonial presence, but it's but at least the instrument sort of made the rounds, I guess. And but that's the story of the ukulele and the cavaquinho. But these instruments were buried by the Portuguese fascist regime in the 20th century. All they wanted people to sing was fado music, because it teaches you to accept your fate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's your fate, God, and the family, and the man is in charge, woman's in the kitchen. And the folk instruments were the opposite of that. The folk instruments, you would exchange ideas and sing around the kitchen table and complain about life in a perhaps healthier way. And so the regime, let's say, didn't shut it down entirely, but it wasn't there was no support or incentive for folk music.
Yeah.
A lot of the old guitars actually went extinct. The chordophones went extinct in the 20th century. They were just like used for firewood and thrown in the fireplace, and so people stopped building them. They stopped playing them first, and then building them. And there's, I think, not just us, but a whole new generation of artists that are picking them up again, and that's a good thing.
Have folks got that kind of history wherever you go, hasn't it, across the world?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter whether you're talking folk music from Portugal. You go 10 minutes down the road here in Somerset, and find the folk music of this part of the world, and it's always partly come from sort of the stories of hardship, or the stories of the people's struggle, but with real hope in it always.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be some light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, there's some really, really great songwriters that I very much appreciate, that can be very dark, very, very, down most of the time, or even all of the time. But I do think that there has to be some light. And again, it goes back to records like Exile on Main Street. You have high points and low points. It's a dynamic listen from start to it's like a journey, right? It's so yeah, we sort of try and live up to those influences in our own humble way, using these funny little instruments.
So what is the long train then?
Well, I think it's about feeling alive. It's a song that tries to sort of paint several examples of when you feel most alive, and in connection with whatever emotion you might be feeling. You might be really, really happy, or you might be at a terrible low point in life, or your life might be changing, you might be leaving home. I remember one of the most intense memories in my life, other than the day my daughter was born, which is definitely number one, amazing, best day of my life. I think going back, when I was in Toronto and going off to university, and I packed all my stuff in my car and got behind the wheel and drove from Toronto to Windsor, and hitting the 401, that moment really sticks out. And it was, you were like, you have the complete notion that is one moment in time that you will never relive.
Yeah. And that you're leaving behind something that you know.
And you feel absolutely, the weight of whatever time you have in your life, and the presence of that, some sort of universal connection,
Yeah,
and
I understand that. Yeah.
So I guess the song just tries to sort of talk about different ways that you can sort of connect to that energy. And it's, one of my personal favorites is driving, if we drive a little bit south of Lisbon and we go past Setúbal on the way to the Alentejo, there's a bunch of storks that are living on the hydro, like the power lines.
Yeah. I've passed that. Yeah.
And I love that. I love seeing them just hanging out. It's like, and then they migrate. They go to, wherever they go to in the winter. I'm not sure where that is.
Yeah.
But it's but I think they're just an amazing species. And so there's that line there. The song was called Storks for a long time.
Really?
Yeah. Before we settled on the long train.
It is an amazing sight. Yeah. We drove past that last time we were in Portugal, and it's like,
oh, that's great. So,
what are they doing there?
I just hanging out. When were you here?
That was 2 years ago. Yeah.
All right, very nice. Yeah.
But it's, and we've been that way a couple of times. But it's one of those things. It's almost supernatural, isn't it? In a way, that kind of.
Yeah, I think that's a good word, because I think it is sort of a supernatural feeling that I'm trying to describe in a very, non-eloquent sort of way, but it is sort of like a transcendental feeling of connecting to something bigger. And that can, I think music is a real driver for that. I mean, there's some songs that can trigger that sort of emotional response time and time again. But it's such a unique phenomenon to each person, because it depends on our own sort of life story and what we go through at different times and what music we connect with when we're young. And I think I hope I'm mistaken, but I think those moments become fewer and further between as you get older, maybe. I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just me, hopefully. And but yeah, no, that's what the song's about. It's just a sort of celebration of life.
Well, look, I guess in a way it's going to become fewer and far between as you get older, but possibly just because your eyes have seen more. Yeah.
Or I mean, I don't know about how you feel, but I also find it harder. This is a terrible thing to say, but I find it harder to connect with new music as I get older.
I don't think that's an unusual thing, to be honest.
Right. But, I mean, I would like to think that we sort of keep our minds open and discover new things and stuff, but the stronger emotional connections, I think, remain stuck in time in a way. I hope it's just me.
Well, I think it can happen, but I think it happens less frequently.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's it exactly. I mean,
I think part of that is you're going through those big transformational experiences.
Yeah.
At a particular time in your life, when you're a young teenager moving into your early 20s, etc. That time of your life where, as you say, you get in the car for the first time and travel miles for the first time, and it's just like, oh, I have this freedom, and I can kind of choose what I do today. That's a massive. The first time you can choose what you do today. That's
with your whole day and the whole week and the whole month and the whole year.
Right, I mean, that's a massive thing, right?
Yeah,
because up until that time, you've been kind of beholden to your parents' time, and you've been safe within the nest, and now you're looking at the world, and you're making decisions as to where you go in it. That's a huge thing. So yeah, any of the music that comes into that soundtrack of that time, is massive for you.
But that's the funny thing about that moment I told you about driving down the 401 on the way to Windsor. I remember the moment, but funny enough, I don't remember the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember I know everything that I was listening to at the time, but I don't remember at that exact moment what I was listening to, and that's a shame. But another thing I wanted to say, going back to the whole discovery thing, yes, it is fewer and further between, but it's not over. I mean, I was at South by Southwest a few years ago, I think 2016 or so, and I went to see my friend Rishi from Elephant Stone, which is a band in Montreal, he's based in Montreal now. But before Elephant Stone played at Hotel Vegas, there was another band that was on that I didn't know, and they hit the stage, and that was definitely that sort of moment of discovery, because they've become one of my favorite new bands. It's a band from Houston, Texas called Chicha, spelled XYXA, and they mix, rock and roll with cumbia. So they're doing. I don't think if I hadn't seen Chicha at that time, it's possible that you would not have Lusitanian Ghosts in the same way,
right?
Because I understood that they were fusing rock and roll with cumbia, and cumbia was part of their heritage. The Latin America rhythms from Mexico, Colombia, and so I kind of accepted the instruments, the chordophones, as a leading force in Lusitanian Ghosts, or a raison d'être in Lusitanian Ghosts, partly because I understood that rock and roll itself doesn't have to be stuck in time. And rock and roll should evolve, and it should sort of branch out and be more crossover. There's no point in, being in Portugal and trying to write songs like I did in London, or, trying to be the next Nick Cave or Bruce Springsteen or what. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So it's sort of like, and Chicha really sort of tuned me onto that possibility. So I thank those guys.
Maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe the way we've got to look at it as well. And if this is resonating with anybody else out there today, I hope you're feeling the same way. But maybe the way that us of a certain age need to look at it is that at a certain time in life, we just need to become more focused.
That too.
So
I think it's easy to, it's easy to become less focused in a way. And I think it takes more work to become more focused, because there, especially like we were saying, there's so much going on so many levels these days. You could just sort of
blow up with it all.
Waste your life away scrolling on social media or whatever, rather than doing something productive and creative, So I hear you.
Yeah. So, just finding that thing that excites you again takes you back a little bit, because you're experiencing that same kind of transcendental feeling, if you like.
Yeah. And
it's really good. And then maybe it's the experience to go with it, to go, do you know what? That's my focus now. That's my
but at the same time, you can do that on. Okay, I'm going to sort of appear to be contradicting myself, but you can do that on multiple levels. These days I'm very, very happy to be writing songs again with my old bandmate from the Conscience Pilots, the band we had in Toronto in the 90s, Edward Pond. And, so Conscience Pilot is working on new material, and there might be, new sort of indie, glam, pop, whatever you want to call it, on that level. Whereas with Lusitanian Ghosts, it's something else, and it's the chordophones, and it's experimental. And I can even put out solo songs once in a while with, my daughter playing cello, so it's like, whatever sort of moves you at the time.
Yeah.
You without sort of losing the thread and the focus of each project. Experience allows you to run multiple projects, I think, hopefully in a somewhat successful way.
I think sometimes actually having those differences, then those different types of projects and different opportunities actually allows you to find some freedom in your craft as well. I think that's quite important.
Because it's also not, it wouldn't be a good thing to sort of get pigeonholed and just feel restricted to just writing on chordophone instruments if you want to make a pop record, like it's so yeah, like, and another experience that I was extremely fortunate to have just before the pandemic, I went to Toronto and played bass, reuniting with my old high school band Passion Flower, where I was just I'm not singing on it, I'm just a bass player. But I always love playing bass because it's a totally different experience to being in the band when you're not fronting, and you can just really dig into the instrument and have a totally different approach and perspective. So I really treasure also those moments of being able to do or playing different roles in different projects.
So it sounds, Neil, like with all of these things going on, you're actually finding really good ways of filling up your cup all of the time.
Yeah, I mean, filling up my creative cup, because on the business side, the music industry is a many splendored thing, and I'm also running a label and a publishing company here in Portugal, working with many other artists, and that keeps me busy and out of trouble most of the time. And but I had to balance that with more creative time again, because and I mean, to be fair, I think that was already sort of something I recognized before the pandemic, but the pandemic also sped that up. And that was a good speeding up. It's like, there was multiple levels of speed, not maybe that's not the best choice of words, but there was multiple levels of like readiness to implement some creative ideas, and you might not have had that time without the pandemic.
Yeah,
you might have wanted to do something that you didn't do because you were too busy at work or whatever, and I think so. There's also a positive side to it at the end of the day.
It kind of brings us right round to where we started the conversation. It's very similar to actually, why I continue to do this was because, some people go, oh, well, yeah, but if you're getting busy with work, perhaps this is what you need to relinquish. It's like, no, because if I don't do this, then actually I would actually feel more tired. I'd actually feel more, right? Because there are certain things that you've just got to do because they actually make you happy, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? Because it goes back to what we were saying about, it's not about pausing and doing nothing. It's about pausing to do something that really you enjoy doing so much that it recharges your batteries.
Yeah.
And it improves your quality of life. And it's, I think that's what it's all about. And it's, I'm trying to sort of keep that more in perspective post-pandemic than I was able to do before. So that's where I see the light. Or, I know a lot of people suffered, of course, a lot during the pandemic, and it was a terrible time for many people. but the first time we paused and we were stuck at home and we couldn't go out, I mean, I actually really treasure that time as well. It was not, I can't, it was a really bad time for a lot of people, but I can't complain. I feel very fortunate in that way, because it was a positive and constructive time with the family and the kids, and in my own mind, sort of reflecting on things and trying to sort of reconsider a lot of decisions. And so yeah, you can put that time to good use as well.
So over the whole of the new album, we get these kind of themes, do we, in terms of sort of?
Yeah, I actually haven't gone back to hear the rest of the record. But I mean, we finished the whole record mid-January, and we mixed it the same week. And the record is now at the mastering phase with Chris von Rattenkraut at Soundgarden Studios in Hamburg, and I haven't gone back. He sent us last week. He sent Micke and I the full mastered album, stereo and mono, for us to approve. And because, as I said, I was at Westway Lab last week and with Nacho Vegas on the road here in Portugal doing some promo for his record, I haven't actually gone back, and so I haven't heard it in like over a month. To the point where like I would have to jog my memory to actually comment on the other songs. But what I can tell you is that the whole thing follows the same approach, recording wise, analog wise. Everything was recorded on 2-inch tape.
Wow.
Mixed down to 1/4 inch.
Yeah.
No digital up until, of course, the very last step before it goes on Spotify or whatever. And we're going to press 2 LPs, 1 mono, 1 stereo. There will not be a CD release. But unless there are vinyl delays at the factories and such, I would expect that the album would be out mid to late September. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Just in time for my birthday, which is great.
When's your birthday?
Last day of September. Maybe we should go for that as the release date.
I'll make a note. I think we're looking, again, it depends on the vinyl delays, but I was aiming at somewhere around September 14th. And then there will be a show in Lisbon on October 14th. So the goalposts, the mid-range of the goalposts is your birthday.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh.
And you are, of course, invited to the release show on October 14th.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
A small little theater called Teatro da Borda by the castle in Lisbon, in the Moraria neighborhood where I was born.
Wow, yeah. Fantastic. Look, I'm really excited to listen to the rest of it, because if it's anything like the one track that you've released already, it's going to be fantastic. And it's yeah, I think it's lovely that you're bringing these instruments back for people to hear, or enabling people to hear these instruments in a very accessible way as well, but actually crafting something very unique and different with it as well. That's really what excites me about this as a whole project. So thanks, Neil.
Thank you. I mean, those are very kind words. It's at the end of the day, to us, they are just rock and roll songs. But I think Micke once said in an interview that he, when he started writing the songs on the Amarantina, even at the composition level, the songwriting level, it changed the way he was approaching the songwriting process. So it's not just a sort of sound or a color that you give the production in the studio. It is very much, the whole thing is anchored on the instruments. It's lyrically, thematically, I'm not writing the same songs that I wrote in London, rock and roll, etc. All of the themes follow direct life experiences that I've had in Portugal, and they are sort of somewhat, I suppose, they're somewhat biographical, not in a literal way, but like just sort of a general influence sort of way. So I hope you like what you hear in the rest of the record.
I'm sure I will. Folks, if you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to experience some Lusitanian Ghosts, the single, The Long Train, is it out now, or is about?
It is out now. Yeah, it's
out now. It's available where, Neil?
On all streaming platforms in stereo and glorious mono mixes.
Well, you've got to listen to it in both. Okay, just to A, get the streams up, and B, to understand what Monet sounds like for some of you whippersnappers out there. And the album, which is going to be called Lusitanian Ghosts III, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't really come up with a catchy title or anything. It's the third album, so I think we're just going to keep the.
Neil was a Sky fan when he was younger, and so he had Sky 1, 2, 3, and he thought, well, why not?
Yeah, I mean, with the second album, with Exotic, Quixotic, I had the album title and the windmill sort of imagery with the Don Quixote thing. I mean, I had that whole thing down before we even made the record. I knew I wanted it to have that title. And the songs were about, quests and the sort of personal challenges in our lives and stuff. With this one, I think it's actually in a way, it's a less planned thing, and it's more spontaneous. And we just don't think any of the songs are sort of, what do you call it? Like title tracks, if you will.
But so I think you should do a Led Zeppelin. I think you should literally just have a picture on the cover.
Yeah.
And let people decide what they want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's that's a good idea. I mean, I think that's what we did on the first one, actually. It was a big oil painting of our 6 faces at the time. But of course, because it was the first one, it ended up just being self-titled. But yeah, we don't have to put a 3 on the cover. It'll just be sort of like Lusitanian Ghosts.
Yeah. And then let people decide. They can call it
And to be fair, it also feels, because like I said, on the first album, we were tracking as a regular rock and roll band with bass and drums and guitar, and the chordophones were overdubbed. Whereas in the second album, we lost the guitars, and we recorded on tape, but we mixed on digital. And this third album is actually, it actually feels like a debut album to me, because I think it's the first time that the whole vision has come together, from the songwriting perspective to the analog studio, to the analog mixing, to the final master of the album. So it kind of feels like it should just be Lusitanian Ghosts, and the fact that it is the third record, well, yeah, it took us a couple tries.
That's just when it came out.
Yeah.
Neil, it's been an absolute pleasure, as normal.
Thank you so much.
With you. I always enjoy our conversations. Please do go and check out Lusitanian Ghosts. This has been my guest, Neil Leyton, today. If you've enjoyed this, do go and share it with lots of other people. Not because I want to become famous or anything, because I'm not going to be, but just because it shares a little bit of extra music with other people, which is the best way for people to find out about new music. We will see you again later in the week with another My Music. Until then, bye for now.
Thank you so much, Graham.